Hi, everybody. I'm Candid Stanisci of NLL Lacrosse Talk. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV, channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. Now, joining me, Gary Groob, the co-host here, and our very special guest, Paul Del Monte of the Western Lacrosse Association. And he is their commissioner. Hey, Commish, how's it going?
I'm doing well. Thanks out here on the West Coast. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. We love talking lacrosse, and we love drilling down into all the lacrosse. So this is my first opportunity to talk to you about the Western Lacrosse Association. But first, we want to know the question we always ask, and that is, of course, how did you get involved with lacrosse? How did it all start?
Yeah, so I'm a son of Italian immigrants, and
Hard to believe.
Yeah, given my name, but despite that, and my dad having no exposure to certainly North American sports, I played soccer, of course, as a young kid, which was automatic, but. I think one of my neighbors was, played lacrosse. So the kids around my age, and, they kind of asked my dad if I would be interested in playing. And, the lacrosse box at the time was a few blocks away. So, I got a stick and a helmet and some gloves. And I think I was about 8 years old at the time and gave it a shot. And so grew up in, Vancouver playing lacrosse, and those were the roots of it, starting way back then. I who would have known that I would have, made a lifetime of it and stayed involved in the game. But I'm grateful for my dad having done that. It certainly created a lot of opportunity and lasting memories for me, for sure.
Well, let me make it about we. I'm of Italian background, both sides as well. And I had a grandmother that was a sports fanatic. In fact, I went back to Italy to visit family and friends there. And they all remembered my grandmother at soccer games. She was one of those very loud and very supportive, which meant that maybe there were some people she didn't like the referees that didn't do stuff. So I understand the passion that you grew up with, because there's a bit of a passion that happens in that regard, right?
Indeed.
What held your passion?
You know what? It was the uniqueness of the game. It was it was a game that took a lot of work, but for me, especially at a young age, when it was at a time when saying, "Hey, I'm going to the lacrosse box," and mom and dad not worrying about where you were going for a couple of hours, and I'd take my stick and a couple of lacrosse balls, and I'd walk several blocks away to where the lacrosse box was, and in my youth, and summertime and weekends, and when the weather was good, and just throw the ball around, and there were always a bunch of kids there that were that I knew from the neighborhood and who became my friends, and it just stuck with me. Hockey, I loved hockey, but never really played organized hockey. It was just it was not something in my DNA, and I just had a passion for it, and I kept playing lacrosse from the age of 8, right? I think I took, one summer off when my family was traveling to Italy to go and visit, family at the time. So I was going to be away for several weeks and would have missed the season. But other than that, I played every year until I think 92 or 93, right? From 8 years old. So, just the nature of the game and the friendships I made and the ability to just, grab a stick and a ball and go to the box and do it every single day.
Okay, before I unleash Gary on you, I got one more question. How does the Western Lacrosse Association happen, and why you're involved with it?
Yeah, I several years ago, and I think I started in 2017. I was approached by a couple of governors in the league that I think they were in a transition from previous commissioners, and just asked if I'd be interested. And so my background at that time, I had spent about 15 years with Canucks Sports Entertainment, so the owners of the Canucks and the Grizzlies, going back to the 90s, and so I'd been involved in sports business, sports marketing, and leadership on the Canucks sports entertainment side. So there seemed to be a natural fit from a communications, marketing, business side from the sports angle, and of course my history in the game. At that time, I had stopped playing, certainly, and stopped coaching, and it just seemed like an opportunity. So I met with the governors, and here I am. They haven't fired me yet. I'm still employed, or quote unquote employed. Let's call it. I'll use those terms loosely. I'm engaged by the Western Lacrosse Association, and for me, great opportunity. There's been coaching opportunities in the past, I'll say decade or so. I kind of been there, done that. And it's a way for me to get back to the game and hopefully try to have a positive impact on the WLA, the game of lacrosse, more importantly, and what it means to our country.
Okay. This is where we unleash Gary on you.
I want to go back. We're going to play a little bit of This Is Your Life. And when you were, again, growing up, you East Vancouver, correct? There wasn't any junior there, so you had to travel over to Burnaby. And this is where our story begins. And with the Cablevision, Burnaby of Cablevision. And let's talk a little bit about the team, because what a storied franchise.
Indeed. So I often say that I won the lacrosse lottery. So as a midget / young junior player, I before I played junior A, I got called up to a number of games. So back in the day, it would have been the Richmond Roadrunners, where I played a handful of games with that team, and Burnaby. Those are the two teams that I ended up getting call-ups with. And so when the opportunity came I was invited to try out for the team. Certainly a star-studded lineup at the time, and I jumped at it. Obviously, there was a couple of friends of mine that were a year older and my age that were also going to be playing on the team. So for me, it was like winning the lottery. I ended up in an organization that was filled with future Hall of Famers. I got to be a part of something that was led by Jack Crosby at the time, who's a legendary person out here in the West, and coached by Dan Mattinson, and the team is in the Hall of Fame, rightfully so, and still connected in many ways this day. So the team was a great team. We played a unique style of game, a lot of ball movement, fast break. We really stressed conditioning and fitness was fundamental to our style of play, and we relied on speed and finesse and skill to overcome the obstacles. So I think in my first year, we played and lost in Game 7 to what at the time were the Victoria McDonald's, and then Kevin Alexander and Bob Cool, and they ended up winning the Minto Cup in that year. They were star-studded lineup, and then subsequently went on to 3 consecutive Minto Cups with Cablevision in I think 77, 78, and 79. So I'm blessed to be surrounded by great players, teammates, coaches, and as I said, future Hall of Famers. That experience made a huge impact on the way I approached the game, certainly the way I coached the game and treated it later on in my career. And I'm forever grateful for that.
Yeah, I was going to get onto that one with Mattinson's coaching style. It sounds a lot like your coaching style that you were able to adapt from him.
Yeah, and Dan, certainly took a unique style. Dan didn't play the game, so he came at it from a different viewpoint. But if I had to zoom in on a couple of what I call key fundamentals or principles, where conditioning was at the top of the list. They're right out behind the arena in Burnaby it's called Burnaby Lake, and there is a 10-kilometer trail that goes around this lake. It's countless number of times we'd run that trail, so our endurance level and fitness was such that we'd be in a third period in a close game and we could endure. The other part was transition game and fast break. He believed on leveraging speed and skill to move the ball up and down the floor as quickly as possible. And this was pre-offense defense. So, you had to run up, you would have to transition the ball and go both directions. And then the third component was probably just ball movement and speed and skill of ball movement, right? Leveraging, some of the skilled players that we had in our time. And so as I make my way into coaching later on, certainly I was influenced by, my time with the Salmon Billies as well, and the great people I was surrounded by there, but also some of the principles I took from being a high school football coach for a decade that were, around structure and practice structure and fundamentals and speed and agility and physical skills. but certainly the transition game and the fitness were two things that I took away from my experience with Dan and the Burnaby Cablevision Group. We were well conditioned in my years of coaching the Burnaby Junior Lakers. Stress that. We'd often run for an hour prior to going on the floor. It was a standard routine where we would do our conditioning before we'd hit the floor, and then our practices were up tempo. And to this day, I still socialize with so many of my former players that are certainly accomplished in their own right, but they tell me that they use the same practice plan format that I use, that they remain structured, that they teach the transition game. I mean, I can tell you that we'd be practicing during a Minto Cup final, and we would still be running transition drills to make sure that we were just, smooth and a well-oiled machine to take that ball up and down the floor. I'm a believer that that's fundamental part of the way the game should be played, and I don't forget that from my days in Burnaby.
Right. And again, organizational success, that breeds more organizational success because everybody wants to do their part to be on that kind of pedestal, really.
Indeed. And so, the players within, fondly, I say the word loosely, recall running hills in Burnaby, and we'd run hills for, but in a methodical way, but to develop, speed and endurance, especially in the middle part of our season. And so but they would encourage themselves, right? Because they knew that our standard was to win a Minto Cup. That's what we tried to do. The very first day I walked into the dressing room in 95, ragtag bunch of guys, I said, that's the only reason I want to do this, is to be able to compete for Minto Cups, right? If we're not trying to win a Minto Cup on a regular basis, then we're here for the wrong reasons. So, but players bought into that, right? Players want to be successful. They like the structure and the hard work and the discipline, because they know that the results on the floor are a result of that commitment to practice and conditioning and all of the things that we used to do on a regular basis. So it's not hard to convince players to do the work because they know what the results are. And you're right, that success breeds success. Our phone was always ringing come fall around with players from all over the country that wanted to be a part of our organization, because they knew what we had built and what we were trying to achieve and the standard we had set. And it's something that makes me proud to see that, or hear from my players who are now coaching their sons and daughters in minor lacrosse, and they've got practice plans and they're doing similar drills and structure and things like that they took away from their experience in Burnaby.
Plus, you came from the two-way game where you really needed to have that kind of endurance, playing both ends and playing a good chunk of the game as well. And come the third period, you guys are sitting pretty while the other team is sucking wind, and into fifth gear it goes. And it's a good explanation for why there was 3 Minto Cups in junior.
Yeah, indeed. Right. And unfortunately we were, I think in my tenure in 8 of them and lost 5. So you win and lose some, but at the end of the day, you're there, right? So you're local champions for 8 consecutive years. And then Kurt Milosky certainly carried on that tradition when I left. But a standard was set. You won 3, and there are some games that you're in games and you're just not playing well, and you're down by a few goals going into the third period. That, for me, there was never any doubt that we would excel. So we had many years where we might have lost 1 or no games in the regular season, despite having games that were off. They always had the endurance and stamina and wherewithal mentally as well to compete and to pull out the win.
You certainly put the program into good hands. What was a young Kurt Milosky like? We all know the Kurt Milosky that we've seen over the last number of years with Calgary and Vancouver, but the young Kurt Milosky who's just grabbing Burnaby. Talk a little bit about him taking over.
Yeah, no, indeed. So when I my colleague Dr. Dave Locke, who coached in Burnaby with me, when I was chatting to him about leaving, I wanted to make sure that the franchise was in good hands, because we'd spent a lot of time building up a solid, successful, winning organization in partnership with Jack Crosby, and we wanted to make sure that we had the best possible coach to come in and take over. And so we approached Kurt right away, because he certainly, having played with Kurt, having had him also on the Ravens back in the day, Kurt is, eats, breathes, sleeps lacrosse every minute of the day, right? He was a passionate player with a high lacrosse IQ. He brought that to his coaching career, and is undoubtedly amongst the best coaches in the game. And so for me at that time, it was a no-brainer. He was at the top of the list. Thankfully, he took the role on and continued that success in Burnaby, and so he was just a younger version of himself, right? I think he's a student of the game. I think he probably learns something every week, and every year he wants to try to get better and improve how he is. He was just a younger version of himself, an excellent coach, tactical coach, and really, did an excellent job in Burnaby, and obviously his success continues.
You also had an interesting thing is that you went to UBC and talked to profs and the people in kinesiology about different methods and ideas outside of the lacrosse world on conditioning and how to do that. Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think I wasn't the type of coach that we wouldn't do a ton of running for conditioning purposes and practices. Okay, we would do a very high tempo, up tempo practice, so there would be a lot of natural running that would be part of drills and or team type of work. So you're without knowing it, you're getting the conditioning. But I wanted to make sure that we were at our peak when we hit the playoffs, and in particular the Minto Cup. And so I wanted to make sure that I had the expertise from people at in kinesiology at UBC to help me understand how best to approach several months of a season. Now, keep in mind that we had players that were away either working or playing lacrosse in colleges and things like that. But we would start running in January and February, and we'd start our early sort of endurance type conditioning. So all it did was allow me to sort of structure what we did. So early in the season, preseason, we do a lot of longer distance endurance type runs. As the season progressed, we would shorten those things up to be more speed and endurance, like a lot of bursting, a lot of sprinting, a lot of short distance interval type training, I think would be the correct terminology. And then as we hit the end of this, sort of the tail end of our season or into the playoffs, we might be outside playing a game of 4-on-4, 3-touch, 2-touch soccer games against each other, inter-squad games, and we'd be doing it for 30 or 40 minutes. Well, they're so competitive, they don't want to lose, so they are going super hard. They're working up a real sweat. They're getting the fitness that they need without doing it because they're having fun, and they're running on grass, which is better on their legs as opposed to being on a cement surface. So at a real high general level, that's really what we were trying to do is what do we need to do at different phases of our season with the ultimate objective of peaking, in our playoffs and in particular in the Minto Cup around Labor Day.
All right. Now you head over playing wise up to the newest Salmon Bellies. Now, if you hit the lottery with Burnaby, boy oh boy, what a lottery you hit with New West. We've had Wayne Goss, Warren Goss on. We've had Dave Durrani on. Just great guys, but boy oh boy, talk about the era.
Indeed, right. So my second lottery win, right, to hear my name called at the day, when the Salmon Bellies drafted me, and so. You mentioned Wayne, and Wayne, I played one season in Wayne's last season. And so for me, that in itself was an honor to be, on the same team of someone as legendary status as Wayne. But Jordy Dean, Ben Helches, Eric Kaus, and Rod Bannister, all Hall of Famers that I was fortunate to be surrounded by, and so I never took that for granted. And so you put on the sweater and you played in the historic Queens Park Arena. There's something about that there was an expectation. There were people in the stands that were former players and legends, and you had a standard to uphold, and which I thought was outstanding. So from Al Luthwaite, who coached for a while, and John Hanna and Steve Deesum and so many others that were part of the organization that came back to give back and coach, to the players I was surrounded by, and the standard that was expected. So I don't always like to make the lacrosse hockey analogy, but it would be similar to the Montreal Canadiens. There's a historical significance to the uniform, and the Salmon Bellies hold that same prestigious status in the game, in my opinion. Certainly being a Western bias there, but the organization was outstanding. The way they treated the players, the way they strive to win every year. For them, it was always about the Mann Cup, always about trying to have the best players. And working hard to compete to win a Mann Cup. And so I didn't ever take that for granted. And I was fortunate, as I said, to have been surrounded by so many great players that I looked up to and respected and certainly learned a ton from. And I was so fortunate to have, a decade or more playing for the Salmon Bellies during an era of a team that was inducted into the Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame a couple of years ago, and rightly so, but just some legendary players and long lifetime friends that I've made as a result of that experience.
Again, it's another organization where the expectation of excellence is in the forefront. That's over and above everything. Team above anybody.
It's a given for sure, right? There's a standard. Here it is, right? You're wearing that jersey that is the big W and the salmon on the front of it. There comes expectations, because before you was, Parnell and Sepka and Bionda and Wayne Goss. Okay, say no more, right? Those guys wore the jersey before you, and you have an obligation and responsibility to uphold the standard.
Absolutely. Let's pivot. We're going to pivot into the NLL, and we'll see. I got the Ravens jersey on for you.
I'm really thrilled about that. Very good to see that. That's a collector's item for sure.
Yeah, like I say, I have the white one as well, so I've got, my collection is deep.
Good for you.
But let's talk about building a team from scratch.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into this. What was the thinking on how to put this together? It's like a mold of clay, and then you get the sculpt.
And and we got thrown into a situation where I'd suggest that the NLL may not have been as organized as it is now, and as stable as it is now. But a group of us were thrown in and on the fly, had a short time frame with which to build a team. And the benefit, however, at the time was there were a number of very good quality players that were in British Columbia that were just unable to play out of BC, right? They couldn't get on the plane and fly across the country to go play in Toronto. So Chris Gill and Dan Stroop, for example, they were firemen. Their schedules were flexible, and they played in Toronto for the Rock, right? And so, but we had a lot of guys that were quality players that were sitting here idle and not participating, but a team in Vancouver gave them the opportunity to play in their backyard because they weren't getting on a plane every single weekend to go play a game in another city. So we were fortunate to have the foundation of a number of players from the island, from Darren Reisig and Grant Hamilton to local guys like Bruce Murray and others that weren't on another team, and yet they were blue chip players that immediately stepped in. And then, of course, we gathered. I think our first pick in the expansion draft was Rich Catton, and Rich had a fabulous career as one of the better defenders in the game forever. So we were able to add him right away. We brought out, Dwight Metke, an old time goaltender that came back and played a few years for us. But, again, it was, we were pulling rabbits out of hats to try to put a team together. But fortunately, we had a lot of local talent that just loved the opportunity to be able to compete. And we had some success in the first couple of years. We made the playoffs right away. And, I think, our very, very first game, we beat the Toronto Rock at home and, in the last minute. And it was and we averaged over 10,000 fans in year one. So it was a great start and a lot of momentum and certainly an exciting time. And again, with a number of great people that I had a chance to work with.
There was a challenge. Hang on, Gary. There was a challenge. You have a challenge that a lot of other places don't have, and that is that Vancouver's an island.
Well, There is Vancouver Island, but we play on the mainland, and so Victoria, we had some players there, so that seems simple enough, but we'd have to fly them into practice, and that's not simple or cheap, and because the ferry is from the moment you leave your house to the moment you get to the arena is a few hours, so I mean that's not always practical when guys have to work and then get across to the mainland for practice, so. So there were certainly some challenges. And the other thing is, at the time is, Vancouver lacrosse was always popular, but it's still, it was a niche sport, and the NLL wasn't, as well known outside of lacrosse circles. But I think that, under our, ownership and leadership group, they did a great job. As I said, I think we averaged 10,200 people in year one. And I would think, I'm going to say close to 8,000 of those were paid. And so that's pretty good for year one in the NLL, at least starting. Certainly we aspired for better, but, circumstances, unfortunately, going forward didn't allow that.
The point being that there are always challenges, especially for doing, you referred to it as a niche sport. I'll just say that it isn't a mainstream sport, so it's kind of difficult to get the kind of attention that you need. We're getting that now. And people like you need to be really patted on the back. I'm not saying this because you're on the program. The reason I highlight the challenge of what you're doing is lacrosse is very, how can I put this? It is very family oriented. Once you're part of lacrosse, it's not about challenges. It's about getting together. That's what I notice anyway. Yeah,
no, I think that's a good point. And certainly it's still niche. Hockey's king in our country, and the Canucks, occupy 99% of the news cycle here, with, NFL, MLB, NBA, and all the others squeezing in on the side. But lacrosse has gained some notoriety. And I think with the, ownership groups being the same ones that are of the NHL teams primarily doesn't hurt. You have those synergies that naturally develop. And I think that with the Olympics a few years away and an iteration of the game gaining a little more popularity, again, I think there's tremendous upside, and the numbers are of kids playing in British Columbia, and I'm sure across the country, are gradually increasing. And so, it's not going to be an overnight turn, right? But I think there's some big upside, and certainly the quality of the game is probably as good as it's ever been, right? The speed and the skill of the players is outstanding.
Yeah, but by definition, being a pro sport, you have to be international. That those changes happened a long time ago. That started with hockey, in Russia and Europe, and then basketball going to Europe, and even now football, the NFL going there. So part of being a professional sport is you have to be accepted internationally, and that's why the Olympic thing that we've talked about here on this program is so important. The sixes mean a lot, not in the sense of trying to invent a new game, but making a game that internationally can be played with less difficulty, otherwise playing a different way.
Indeed. So, we talked about our native countries here in Italy. And so a friend of mine, Paulo Bernaro, who I played with and against, he's a former WLA player. And so he goes back and forth between Italy every year, and he helps coach a group of young men in northern Italy every time he's out there, and tries to. And so, again, soccer's king in Italy, but there's, a group of people that are playing in both the men's and women's game are it's gaining a little popularity. So it's incremental, but, one step at a time, you just keep working at it, right? We know those of us who are in it know how great the game is. It's now we got to keep convincing others that it's a great game.
Well, Gary, our international mole, always reports to us the fantastic reception he receives when he goes to Europe and other places in viewing lacrosse and how it's played elsewhere.
Yeah, I'm actually a huge fan. I make it the Rubeski tournament every year with the Gales, and absolutely love it. And
is that the tournament in Prague?
Yes, yes, and that's the watching European lacrosse over the last number of years and watching it take huge steps. It reminds me a lot of hockey.
Right.
And if North America isn't careful, the same thing's going to happen as would happen in hockey.
Yeah, it's on my radar. I know a lot of people who've gone over and either watched or played in it, so it's on. I wouldn't call it a bucket list, but it's on a list for me to go and at least to sort of be an observer, because I've heard there's nothing like it.
Absolutely. That's a week that you don't want to miss, because it's just spectacular in and
And then,
around. Everything
and then
goes.
you get to spend a week in Prague drinking a Czech Pilsner too. So
There you go.
Absolutely.
And now we're at the real reason, Gary.
We're sponsored by a bar around the corner, so.
No, okay. I got it. Yeah, it's strange how lacrosse and a nice cold amber beverage go together usually.
Mm-hmm. Well, there especially because you can't get off the floor without actually having somebody pull a tap for you. It's crazy. Your thoughts on the World Lacrosse that just passed?
Right.
I thought that this was just spectacular, and the women were as intense as the guys in my eyes.
Yeah, indeed. I think, I reflect on, even our own nationals across the country where, the women's game has taken leaps and bounds. So I think we'd be mistaken to discount the quality or the value of women's lacrosse. I think the growth has been tremendous in the women's game, and rightfully so. And when I look at the dads coaching, they're all guys that I played with, played against, coached against, right? I mean, they're all these guys are Hall of Famers. Jordy Dean was coaching his daughters forever, and Grant Hamilton on the island, and guys that you look behind the bench and go, okay, like this is great, because they're engaged with the their daughters and the game, but they're growing the women's game, and there's that coupled with the opportunities south of the border for the women's game and Canadian athletes to participate. I thought that the Worlds was a good showcase of that, and as much as you never want to lose, I think it's a little incentive for Canada, having lost to the US. So it's almost like that hockey rivalry. It's like, okay,
Exactly.
That's the rivalry to come, and now that'll stick with them having that loss, and I think it only bodes well for the game. I think it's excellent.
And you have a legend in your backyard there with Michelle Boyer, and
Indeed.
her tireless work with the Women's Lacrosse Global Network, and everything that she's put into that towards getting the women's game in the forefront. And I think a big kudos should be to her and her organization for what we watched in the Worlds.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, there are some instrumental people, and Michelle is certainly one of those.
All right, let's get into the WLA. And why would you take on the commissionership when you already have a really busy life and already put in your time in lacrosse?
Yeah, Gary, many people ask me that question. Like, are you crazy, or what are you thinking, or, do you know what you're getting yourself into? And, at the end of the day, it's, as I said, it was a way for me to continue to support the game and give back. I thought I could have a bit of an influence in shaping the game and making sure that, we're always putting a positive product on the floor and representing the game respectfully. And so I've found it challenging at times, but rewarding at times. And so, I have to get along with 7 governors and general managers who manage their team and are competitive and passionate in their own right. But I do so, and I think I have a good rapport, respectful rapport with everybody. I guarantee you that we don't always agree. There's always varying opinions on a number of things. But at the end of the day, for me, it's about communication and mutual respect. And, we'll agree or disagree as adults. And then, but we're going to move on, because I genuinely have the best interests of the game and our league at heart. I have to be Switzerland for 63 games plus playoffs. But then, as I saw you at Six Nations this year, then, we have a representative, and now I'm part of that team. I joined that organization, and I'm there to support them. And so this year I was a Shamrock. A couple of years ago, I was with Langley and the Thunder, or the Salmon Bellies, or the Burrs. It doesn't matter to me. At the end of the day, I'm going to be passionately involved in supporting our representative. But to go back to your question, it's about, for me, it was about, being able to give back to the game, and continue to support it, continue to help grow it, continue to raise the profile, and give back to the game. And not only in the Western Lacrosse Association, but I do try to use my voice, across the country. I attend Lacrosse Canada meetings, and I don't hesitate to speak up when I think we should be doing things in a certain way to improve the game at all levels. I really, at this stage of my life and in my role in the game, I see myself as a steward of lacrosse, right? And so I have an obligation to do what's in the best interest of the game and the growth of the game for men and women, from safety initiatives to rule changes to equipment to competition, right? At the end of the day, my job as a commissioner is to play a leadership role in our league, but also to play a leadership role in the game in the West if I can, and nationally whenever I have an opportunity.
All right. I want to talk a bit about this, the past Man Cup. And I'd like you to explain the tier 1, tier 2 ideas that were all over the news and all the drama that came across with it. If you could just put it across for us. Yeah,
sure. So, as you're aware, and probably your listeners and viewers are aware, the Man Cup is between the WLA and the MSL champion. And so when I looked historically at the competitiveness and the competitive integrity of the Man Cup, it's very lopsided. And understandably so, because there's a larger population base and feeder system that feeds into until this year, fewer teams in the East compared to the population base and feeder system in the West. And so as a result, going back to the year 2000, the WLA representative has won 4 Man Cups. And in those series, 10 of the series went 5 games or less. And so, as I've explained to many people, for me, it's not about the WLA winning every Man Cup. It's about the ability to legitimately compete for every Man Cup and maintain the competitive integrity in what I believe is the most iconic championship in the game, the Man Cup. It's something that I still think is coveted by most players. And so how do we do that? And for me, it was about, okay, the West needs to be able to bolster. We still only have a population base. It is what it is, right? And so how do we become more competitive on a regular basis? And so I worked with the BCLA to put policy forward that would enable British Columbia to be classified as a tier 2 province. So that classification transcends just the WLA. It happens in Senior B and Junior A. And so type 1 is you're allowed to pick up players from below your level. So Senior A can pick up, Senior B, Junior A, and so forth. Type 2 can pick up to 3 players from your same level. So Senior A can pick up from other Senior A teams plus the leagues below. And finally is, I think, tier 3, which is, for provinces that are smaller, like Saskatchewan or Manitoba, they can assemble a provincial all-star team, right? Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, they don't have the bodies and historical element of the game that the BC and Ontario do. So they are allowed that level. So for me, it was about creating a competitive integrity and having BC classified as type 2. So that having been said, we go to this policy was passed in May of 2024, effective in 2024. And I'll fast forward, Board of Governors, or the Board, of Directors of Lacrosse Canada on September the 4th, the day that the Shamrocks were flying, while they were in the air, voted to disapprove the policy that was passed in May, thereby denying Victoria the right to pick up the 2 players that they elected. They chose not to bring 3. They brought 2, Mike Messenger and Will Malcolm, both from the Salmon Billies. So at the end of the day, we fought everything possible and brought it to an appeal. It was brought to a federal sports dispute resolution organization. And The long and short of it was Mr. Dick Pound, a well-known person in international sport, was the adjudicator. He heard from both sides, myself representing WLA and Ron McCory, who represented the BCLA. Ron was formerly with Lacrosse Canada. On the other side was Sean Williams, the president, and now the executive director's name escapes me. Anyways, the executive director of Lacrosse Canada were on the other side. Both sides had their presentation and discussion. Mr. Pound ruled in favor of us verbally on the spot, and then subsequently issued a written order. And at the end of the day, it comes down to Lacrosse Canada's execution of their own operating policy.
Right.
And their own policy does not allow them to approve or disapprove of policy passed by its members. So the policy was passed by the members by a vote of 10 member associations to 1 in May, 10 to 1. They, meaning the Lacrosse Canada board, may only veto a policy if it has an impact on the safety of players. It has a financial implication to Lacrosse Canada, or it has a negative impact on the image of the game. And so clearly there's no safety issue. There's no financial considerations. And to borrow words, paraphrase words from Mr. Pound, suggesting that it impacted the image of the game would be a stretch. And so he ruled in our favor at the time and allowed the two players to be eligible, and that now is policy. It's in the lacrosse. You can look it up online. It's in their operating policy that has passed. And to display the competitiveness, you just have to look at the series. Again, this was a 5-game series, and even with Mike and Will playing in game 3 onward, it had little impact on the end result. The other piece to this, there's 2 components. One is competitive integrity, and I think it's essential that our game, is perceived to have competitive integrity, and teams that are on the Mann Cup have a legitimate chance to win. And it comes down to, the best team at the end, but teams that are equal in terms of competitiveness. Every game that you leave or that you don't play is a significant financial implication to the host. The host depends on that revenue for their own league operations and to fund the travel of the team that goes back east the next year. And that's a significant expense to send a team back east for hotel and meals and flights and all that stuff. You're looking at a $75,000 to $100,000 bill to send a team back east. And so if you look at a game at Peterborough, for example, 2,500 season ticket holders, 4,000 seats. Well, if there are 4,000 people paying an average of just $20 a ticket, that's $80,000 in gross revenue for every single game that you play. That doesn't include food and beverage, the beer garden, merchandise, 50-50, webcasting revenue. So every game you don't play, you're leaving perhaps as much as $100,000 in gross revenue on the table. And if you play a 4 or 5 game series, but the series goes 6 or 7 games, the series is successful financially, and meets the standard of competitive integrity. And so that's the answer to your question in terms of policy and Lacrosse Canada and how that all worked out. At the end of the day, it was resolved, I think, fairly, and we go into 2025 and host the Mann Cup next year and hope like heck we can field a competitive team and win our 5th Mann Cup in the past 25 years.
So it seems to me that the important issue here is that you need a meritocracy for deciding what teams get there, because you're relying on that competitiveness to help sell tickets to keep funding the event as it moves from one town to another.
Indeed. And so the WLA as a league has been very competitive. We've sent 4 different teams to the Mann Cup since 2017. Salmon Bellies have been twice, Shamrocks twice, Langley Thunder once, Maple Ridge Bards once. So our league, up until 2 weeks before the end of the season last year, other than the Shamrocks, who were undefeated, had the other 6 teams battling for the remaining 3 playoff spots. The year before that, we had 5 teams or 5 or 6 teams battling for 4 spots from first to fourth. We didn't even know the standings until the last week. So that's been consistent in our league, and our league is very competitive and balanced that way. Alternatively, in the East, there's only been 2 representatives in the last decade. I'll let you figure out, what's going on there. But at the end of the day, I think, having competitive balance in your own league is important because it raises the credibility of the competition in the league. And so for us, we have that night after night. Our league is strong and competitive. However, once you step into the national window and you now compete with the best team from Ontario, you can see the discrepancy. It's not necessarily the first 10 players, it's the second 10 players. It's the balance that you have on your lineup from top to bottom. And you look at Six Nations, all credit to them, to Dewey and John Tavares and the group. They're an outstanding team. I do not take anything away from that group. They are extremely talented, one of the best teams I've ever seen assembled on a floor. They are a great team, and they deserve the Mann Cup. They were the better team. But what I aspire for is what's better for the game across the country. Competitive integrity. Every year the Mann Cup is significant. It's iconic. Let's have a 6 or 7 game series and allow some balance in there.
And the WLA is pretty strong now too. A couple of years ago, Langley was a period away from a Mann Cup in Game 7.
Indeed.
New West
In Peterborough.
In Peterborough.
In Peterborough.
And I remember how nervous everybody was up in the alumni box where I was. Getting into that third period, there was not a whole lot of breathing or a whole lot of joking.
It was tied coming out of the second period. I think Langley just ran out of gas. And quite frankly, Langley was playing 2 junior call-ups for the whole series. And when you're playing against a well-coached, talented team like Peterborough, eventually, you miss some of those things. And so at the end of the day, credit to Peterborough as well, to Paul Day and the entire group. They do an excellent job. They run a great organization.
Mm-hmm. And last year, New West, the same thing. They were a really good team. Victoria, you can't take anything away from them. They were 18-0. They have something really good on the horizon.
Yep, they do. But, at the end of the day, Marshall King gets hurt in Game 3 and he's lost, and it's a significant loss. Not that it would have made perhaps a series-changing difference, but at the end of the day, if you're playing 6 and maybe 7, the series gains momentum because you get the spinoff. You get social media attention, you have fan attention, you have national media coverage, you have more eyeballs and attention on our game, which is what we all want, right? I'm not saying no one. There are going to be 4-game sweeps or 5-game series, but if we played a 7-game series, TSN is going to cover it. People are going to cover it. It's going to be a sporting event that'll get national coverage, and I think that benefits everybody.
This is why we have the conversation, and we've had a lot of support from everybody involved in lacrosse. It may be hard to get, and it might be, less than 100 full voiced or 100%, but the 6s at the Olympics, that's the problem they're trying to solve, which is the competitive balance, which is important because we want to be seen at our best, not at the other.
Indeed. And, let's be honest, it's going to be Canada, US in the final. And we know that for a while, but no different than, women's hockey, women's lacrosse. Teams will gradually catch up. Teams will gradually get there. So, but we have a role to play not only within our own country but internationally to help grow the game. I mean, it originated here, right? It is the creator's game, and so what can we do to grow the game not only within our own country but internationally?
You got to forgive my internet, Rogers. Rogers is doing numbers with me. I really want to thank you for taking the time with us. This was fantastic and so informative.
I appreciate it, Gary. Great to run into you at the Mann Cup. I appreciate you taking a minute, and thanks for bringing some other stuff to my attention that we addressed during the Mann Cup. So thank you for that. Yeah. Thank you both for having me. This is a thrill. I love it. I think you're doing great work here. You're doing your part as well to continue to promote and support the game, and I commend you on that and applaud you. Appreciate it. I'm available as a resource to you at any time, so don't hesitate to reach out. and Gary, flip me an address. I'll send you a bobblehead.
Perfect, no problem.
What? I don't get one. You have so many.
I'll send him a bunch.
I'll take care of that after the show.
I listen. It is it's something we appreciate you and everybody involved in lacrosse, and more importantly, you know, a person in your position really does help to make things happen. And I do believe everything you said here speaks to the importance and the commitment that we have to have the best teams we possibly can and find as many of the best players we can find in the game of lacrosse, and then be able to highlight them. And as you said, there are tournaments, there are teams, there are events that are really the reason why this game will survive and flourish.
I agree. And if you guys continue to use your influence in a positive way, maybe you can start by having the PLL relax their restrictive policies around guys play other lacrosse. I mean, the way I read their contract, they can play basketball or soccer or other sports, but they're not allowed to play in other lacrosse leagues. So I'll leave it to you to put a little more pressure on them for that.
We've had that conversation already here.
I know.
We've had that conversation, and
I've had it directly with them as well, and they don't. I don't think really care.
I think that's it's. I think it's misguided with good intent and creating some sort of idea of survival. But I think, you know, I'm a firm believer. I know water is a very big thing in lacrosse. You know, we've got the Lakers, and then of course you got the salmon bellies. I think high tides lift all boats, and sometimes I think we forget that.
Indeed.
Thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And
Thank
Gary, thanks for doing this as well.
Thank you, Frank, as always.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
For Gary Groob and Paul Del Monte, I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. Thank you for watching Lacrosse Talk, seen live Thursdays at 4 p.m. The show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network. For Lacrosse Talk news, entertainment, and other sports programming we offer, please check out SpanglishWorld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time. That'll be Thursday at 4. Pick up a stick. Enjoy the game.